What happens when the most feared man in the city realizes the greatest threat to his empire isn't a rival syndicate, but the woman sleeping in his bed? When Gabriel Romano's private jet was grounded by a sudden coastal storm, he decided to surprise his wife a day early. He walked into his impenetrable fortress, expecting the quiet, luxurious comfort of his home. Instead, he found his most loyal, long-serving maid standing in the darkened hallway, as pale as a ghost. She didn't offer to take his coat. She grabbed his arm, her fingernails digging into his flesh, and whispered 2 words that would completely dismantle his entire world: "Stay silent." To understand the magnitude of the betrayal that would shatter the Romano crime family, you must first understand the man who built its modern iteration. Gabriel Romano was not a man who believed in luck, nor did he believe in coincidences. He believed in control, leverage, and absolute loyalty. At 36, he had ruthlessly consolidated power over the eastern seaboard's illegal shipping ports, turning a fractured, bloody street gang into a highly sophisticated, multi-billion-dollar enterprise. He was feared by his enemies, respected by his associates, and entirely untouchable to the law. But every fortress has a weak point, and Gabriel's was his wife, Victoria. Victoria was a vision of old money grace, the daughter of a prominent, if financially ruined, state senator. She had stepped into Gabriel's dark, violent world like a swan landing on a lake of crude oil, perfect, pristine, and seemingly untouched by the grime that surrounded her. She was the one soft edge in Gabriel's razor-sharp life. When the world demanded blood from him, Victoria offered him peace. When his older brother, Leo, was brutally gunned down in a still unsolved drive-by shooting 14 months prior, it was Victoria who had held Gabriel as he wept in the dark, the only time the ruthless Mafia boss had ever shed a tear. They lived in a sprawling, ultra-secure estate in Oyster Bay, New York. The property was a modern marvel of security, masquerading as a classic architectural masterpiece. It was surrounded by 12-foot stone walls, monitored by thermal cameras, and patrolled by armed guards who answered only to Gabriel. Inside, however, it was a golden cage of breathtaking luxury. Vaulted ceilings, imported Italian marble, priceless artwork, and an army of staff dedicated to keeping the Romano household running with silent perfection. Among that staff was Beatrice. Beatrice was not just a maid. She was an institution. A stoic, observant woman in her late 50s, she had worked for the Romano family since Gabriel was a teenager. She had seen the transition of power from Gabriel's ruthless father to his reckless brother, Leo, and finally to the cold, calculating Gabriel. Beatrice knew everything. She knew which floorboards creaked. She knew how Gabriel liked his espresso at exactly 6 a.m., and she knew to keep her eyes down and her mouth shut when the men in tailored suits came to the house with briefcases and bloody knuckles. Beatrice was practically a ghost, moving through the estate with invisible efficiency. It was a Tuesday in late November. The sky over New York was the color of bruised iron, threatening the first severe ice storm of the season. Gabriel was scheduled to leave for a critical, high-stakes sit-down in Chicago. A rival faction from the Midwest had been encroaching on his supply lines, and Gabriel intended to crush the rebellion before it could spark a war. It was supposed to be a 3-day trip. Before leaving, he stood in the grand foyer, his tailored charcoal overcoat draped over his shoulders. Victoria stood before him, adjusting his silk tie with a small, affectionate smile. 3 days is a long time in this big house alone, Victoria murmured, her green eyes looking up at him through thick lashes. Promise me you'll be careful. Gabriel cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing against her porcelain skin. I'm always careful, Victoria. The house is on lockdown while I'm gone. No one comes in, no one goes out. My men are at the gates. I know, she sighed softly, leaning into his touch. I just worry. Ever since Leo, I just can't bear the thought of losing you, too. The mention of Leo caused a familiar, cold tightening in Gabriel's chest. He kissed her forehead, lingering for a moment to breathe in the scent of her expensive jasmine perfume. Nothing is going to happen to me. I'll be back Friday night. I love you." "I love you too," Victoria whispered. Gabriel turned and walked out the heavy mahogany double doors, stepping into the waiting armored SUV. As the vehicle pulled away, sweeping down the long, winding driveway lined with bare, shivering oak trees, Beatrice watched from the second-floor landing. She held a stack of freshly laundered linens in her arms. Her face was an unreadable mask, but her dark eyes lingered on the imposing figure of Victoria, who stood in the foyer, watching the SUV disappear. As soon as the taillights vanished past the iron gates, Victoria's affectionate smile dropped, instantly replaced by a cold, sharp expression. Beatrice noticed. Beatrice always noticed. But in the world of the Romanos, the golden rule of survival for the help was simple. See nothing, hear nothing, say nothing. The Chicago trip was a disaster, but not in the way Gabriel had anticipated. He didn't even make it to the sit-down. Halfway through the flight, as his private jet fought through severe turbulence over Ohio, his encrypted satellite phone buzzed. It was his second in command, Dominic. The Midwestern faction hadn't shown up to the rendezvous point. Instead, the Chicago warehouse where the meeting was supposed to take place had been raided by federal agents just an hour before Gabriel was scheduled to arrive. Someone had tipped off the FBI. The sit-down was a trap, a highly coordinated ambush meant to put Gabriel behind bars for the rest of his life. Gabriel ordered the pilot to turn the plane around immediately. The ice storm had worsened, pounding the eastern seaboard with freezing rain and high winds. The jet was forced to land at a private, secluded airstrip in New Jersey rather than their usual hangar. The drive back to Long Island was treacherous, slow, and steeped in a paranoid silence. Who knew about the meeting? The circle of men who had the location was incredibly small. Only his top 3 lieutenants, and of course Victoria, who managed his personal calendar. But Gabriel dismissed the thought of his wife instantly. He began mentally dissecting his lieutenants, searching for the rat. It was 2:14 a.m. on Thursday morning when Gabriel's SUV finally approached the Oyster Bay estate. The freezing rain lashed against the tinted windows. Gabriel instructed his driver and bodyguards to stand down and remain at the outer perimeter gatehouse. He wanted to go inside, alone. He had a headache that felt like a spike driven through his temples, and he just wanted to slip into bed beside his wife, breathe in her jasmine scent, and sleep for a few hours before beginning the bloody work of hunting down the traitor in his ranks. He bypassed the main entrance. Instead, he used his biometric scan to open the private underground garage, slipping through the reinforced steel door that led directly into the subterranean levels of the mansion. The house was tomb-silent. The only sound was the distant, muffled howling of the wind outside and the hum of the estate's massive HVAC system. Gabriel moved with the silent, predatory grace that had kept him alive on the streets before he wore $1,000 suits. He walked up the spiral service staircase, intending to cut through the kitchen and head straight up to the master suite. As he reached the landing and stepped into the sprawling, dark kitchen, illuminated only by the faint, blue glow of the commercial refrigerators, a shadow detached itself from the pantry doorway. Gabriel's hand instantly went to the suppressed Glock 19, holstered at his hip. His reflexes were razor-sharp. But before he could draw, a figure stepped into the dim light. It was Beatrice. She was fully dressed in her dark grey uniform, which was unusual for 2 a.m. But what struck Gabriel, what made his blood instantly run cold, was her face. Beatrice, the woman who had stoically scrubbed blood out of expensive Persian rugs without batting an eye, looked utterly terrified. Her skin was ashen, her eyes wide and wild, the whites reflecting the pale blue light of the kitchen. Gabriel relaxed his grip on his weapon, frowning. "Beatrice, what the hell are you doing awake? It's the middle of the night." He spoke in a low, rumbling voice, stepping toward her. He expected her to apologize, to offer him a hot meal or a drink, as was her custom. Instead, Beatrice lunged forward. She closed the distance between them with surprising speed and grabbed his forearm. Her grip was desperate, her thin fingers digging into the expensive wool of his coat with a frantic strength. Gabriel stared at her, stunned. Touching the boss uninvited was a severe offense, one that Beatrice knew well. "Mr. Romano," she breathed, her voice barely a thread of sound. She was trembling violently. "Beatrice, you're shaking. What is it? Did someone breach the perimeter?" Gabriel's mind raced. If there were intruders, why hadn't the alarm sounded? Why hadn't his guards radioed in? Beatrice shook her head frantically, her eyes darting toward the hallway that led to the main wing of the house. She pulled him closer, her face inches from his chest, and whispered the words that would echo in his nightmares for the rest of his life. "Stay silent." Gabriel's brow furrowed. "What?" "Do not make a sound," Beatrice whispered, a tear finally escaping her eye and rolling down her wrinkled cheek. "If you make a sound, you are a dead man, Gabriel. You have to listen to me." She had used his first name. She hadn't called him Gabriel since he was 12 years old. The sheer abnormality of the situation sent a chill down his spine that had nothing to do with the freezing rain outside. "Who is in the house?" Gabriel demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous, gravelly whisper. He drew his gun, the cold metal comforting in his hand. "The devil," Beatrice whispered back, her voice breaking. "In your study. Don't go in there. Turn around. Go back to the garage, get in your car, and drive away. If you go down that hall, everything you know will end." Gabriel Romano did not run. He did not hide in his own home. Gently but firmly, he peeled the terrified maid's hands off his arm. "Lock yourself in the pantry, Beatrice," he ordered softly. "Do not come out until I tell you to." Ignoring her desperate, silent pleading, Gabriel stepped out of the kitchen and into the grand hallway. The darkness of the house suddenly felt heavy, suffocating. He moved like a ghost over the thick carpets, his finger resting lightly on the trigger of his gun, heading towards the west wing, toward his private study. The hallway leading to the west wing felt 10 miles long. Gabriel's senses were heightened to a painful degree. He could hear the heavy, rhythmic thumping of his own heart. He could hear the creak of the ancient oak branches scraping against the bulletproof windows outside. And as he drew closer to his private study, a biometric-locked room that only he and Victoria had access to, he heard something else. Voices. The heavy, soundproofed mahogany double doors were slightly ajar, a sliver of warm, golden light slicing through the darkness of the corridor. Gabriel pressed his back against the cold silk wallpaper, inching towards the crack. 1,000 scenarios raced through his mind. Was it a home invasion? Had a rival crew bypassed the perimeter guards? Was Victoria being held hostage? The thought of his wife in danger made a white-hot fury ignite in his stomach. He prepared himself to breach the room and empty his magazine into whoever dared threaten his home. But as he reached the sliver of light and peered through the 1-inch gap, his blood turned to ice. Victoria was not tied to a chair. She was not crying or begging for her life. She was sitting on the edge of Gabriel's massive antique desk, wearing a stunning, emerald-green silk robe. She held a crystal tumbler of Gabriel's oldest, most expensive scotch. She looked entirely relaxed, casually swinging one bare leg. Standing across from her, pacing the length of the Persian rug, was a man. Gabriel narrowed his eyes, trying to get a clear look at the man's face. When the figure turned into the light of the desk lamp, the breath was knocked out of Gabriel's lungs as if he had been struck with a sledgehammer. It was Richard Sterling. Richard Sterling was the ruthless, highly ambitious district attorney of New York. He had built his entire political career on a platform of eradicating organized crime, with a specific public vendetta against the Romano family. He was Gabriel's sworn enemy. Sterling was the man Gabriel had spent millions in bribes and legal fees trying to outmaneuver. What the hell was the district attorney doing in his private study at 2:30 in the morning, drinking his scotch, alone with his wife? Gabriel's grip on his gun tightened until his knuckles turned white. Was Victoria having an affair? Was she sleeping with the enemy? The betrayal stung, a sharp, bitter pain in his chest. But the reality of what he was about to hear was infinitely worse than simple infidelity. "The Chicago raid was a failure," Sterling said, his voice tight with frustration as he stopped pacing. He ran a hand through his graying hair. The feds hit the warehouse, but Romano wasn't there. His jet turned around over Ohio. He's probably hiding out in Jersey right now. Victoria took a slow, elegant sip of her scotch. She didn't look surprised. "Gabriel is paranoid, Richard. I told you if even one hair was out of place on that setup, he would abort. You moved too early." "I moved when the intelligence was actionable," Sterling snapped. "You gave me the coordinates. You promised me he would be there." Gabriel froze. The floor seemed to drop out from beneath him. "You gave me the coordinates." Victoria, his beautiful, loving wife, his sanctuary. She was the rat. She was the one who had tipped off the feds. "Keep your voice down," Victoria reprimanded sharply, her tone dropping the sweet, gentle cadence she used with Gabriel, replacing it with something cold, authoritative, and utterly unrecognizable. "The guards are outside, but sound travels." "He's going to know there's a leak," Sterling said, stepping closer to her. "He's going to start tearing his organization apart, looking for the mole. Let him." Victoria smiled. It was a terrifying smile. "He'll suspect Dominic. He'll suspect his lieutenants. He will never suspect me. I have him completely blind." Gabriel stood paralyzed outside the door. He felt physically sick, his mind fractured, struggling to reconcile the woman he had kissed goodbye mere hours ago with the ruthless stranger sitting on his desk. But the nightmare wasn't over. Victoria set her scotch glass down and reached into the deep pocket of her silk robe. She pulled out a small, heavy velvet pouch and tossed it onto the desk. It landed with a dull thud. "What is that?" Sterling asked, eyeing the pouch cautiously. "Leverage," Victoria said simply. "You've been whining about not having enough physical evidence to tie Gabriel to the extortion rackets on the docks. That pouch contains the encrypted flash drive from the offshore accounts. It has every ledger, every payout, every dirty politician on Gabriel's payroll for the last 5 years." Sterling's eyes widened. He reached for the pouch, untying the drawstrings. He dumped the contents onto the desk. A black, encrypted USB drive clattered onto the wood. But something else fell out with it. It was a heavy, gold signet ring. The face of the ring was deeply engraved with the Romano family crest, a roaring lion. The gold was heavily tarnished, stained with something dark and rust-colored into the deep grooves of the metal. Gabriel stared at the ring through the crack in the door. The air left his lungs in a silent, agonizing gasp. It was Leo's ring. His brother, Leo, had worn that ring every day of his life. When the police found Leo's body, riddled with bullets in a rainy alleyway 14 months ago, the ring had been missing. Gabriel had torn the city apart looking for it, hunting for the men who had taken his brother's life and his family's crest. He had executed 3 rival bosses on mere suspicion. "Is this?" Sterling murmured, picking up the ring with 2 fingers, looking at the dried blood caked into the gold. "Leo's," Victoria confirmed, her voice utterly devoid of emotion. "Victoria, for God's sake," Sterling hissed, stepping back. "Why do you have this? You told me you hired independent contractors for the hit on Leo. You said there was no physical connection back to you." "There isn't," Victoria replied coolly, sliding off the desk. "The contractors brought me the ring as proof of death before I paid them. I kept it because it's the ultimate insurance policy." Gabriel spent the last year slaughtering his rivals, entirely convinced it was a mob hit. He consolidated so much power out of pure vengeance. He did exactly what I needed him to do. Gabriel's vision blurred. The gun in his hand felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "You're a psychopath," Sterling muttered, staring at her in disbelief. You orchestrated the murder of your husband's brother, just so Gabriel would inherit the family business? I did it, Victoria said, stepping into Sterling's personal space, her eyes flashing with dark, terrifying ambition, because Leo was an idiot who was driving this syndicate into the ground. Gabriel is efficient. Gabriel knows how to make money. I made him the undisputed king of New York. She reached out, her manicured finger tapping Sterling on the chest. And now that he's built the empire, I'm handing it over to you. You arrest Gabriel. You seize the assets. We split the offshore accounts, and you ride the high-profile conviction straight into the governor's mansion. Just like we planned. Outside the door, surrounded by the shadows of his golden cage, Gabriel Romano realized he was already a dead man. The life he thought he had was a meticulously crafted illusion. Every touch, every "I love you," every tear Victoria had shed at his brother's funeral. It was all a performance by a monster far more dangerous than he could ever be. He slowly raised the Glock, his finger sliding off the trigger guard and onto the trigger. He could kick the doors open right now. He could put a bullet between Sterling's eyes and then turn the gun on the woman he loved. But as the cold steel of the trigger pressed against his index finger, Beatrice's terrified whisper echoed in his mind. If you make a sound, you are a dead man. If Victoria had orchestrated a hit on his brother and set up a trap with the FBI, who else was in on it? Were the perimeter guards outside loyal to him? Or were they loyal to her money? If he fired this gun, would he even make it out of the house alive? Gabriel lowered the weapon. He didn't need to act with blind rage. He was Gabriel Romano. He was the king of New York, and the Queen had just declared war. Silently, without making a single sound, Gabriel turned away from the crack in the door and melted back into the shadows of the hallway. The descent back down the grand staircase felt entirely different than the ascent. Gabriel Romano was no longer a husband returning to his sanctuary. He was a ghost haunting a graveyard. Every step was calculated, his leather soles making zero sound against the imported marble. He bypassed the state-of-the-art security keypads and biometric scanners. They were useless now. The house's digital nervous system was likely compromised, monitored by the very guards paid to protect him. He slipped back into the commercial kitchen, the pale blue glow of the refrigerators casting long, skeletal shadows across the stainless steel prep tables. He moved directly to the walk-in pantry, tapped a quiet, syncopated rhythm on the reinforced frosted glass, and opened the door. Beatrice was sitting on an overturned crate of San Marzano tomatoes, clutching a rosary. When Gabriel entered, she didn't gasp. She just looked up at him, her dark eyes searching his face for the verdict. She saw the cold, dead emptiness in his gaze, and she knew. He had seen the truth. "How long?" Gabriel asked. His voice was barely a vibration in the air, a whisper so hard and flat it sounded like two stones grinding together. Beatrice swallowed, her hands trembling as she lowered the rosary. "Since the week before Leo died. I overheard her on the secure landline. She was speaking in Russian to a man named Nikolai. She was negotiating the price for the drive-by. I didn't know for sure until the night of the funeral. I saw her looking at the signet ring in her vanity mirror. She was smiling, Gabriel. She was smiling while she held your dead brother's ring." Gabriel felt a physical pain in his chest, a sickening twist of his own heart. "Why didn't you tell me, Beatrice? You watched me tear the city apart. You watched me bleed." "Who was I going to tell?" Beatrice whispered fiercely, tears finally spilling over. "The security detail, Sullivan, the night captain, is sleeping with her. He's been on her payroll for a year." "Dominic? Your second-in-command takes his orders from her when you aren't looking. If I had spoken a word, I would have ended up in the bottom of the Hudson River, and you would have thought I was just a crazy old woman who stole the silver. She had you completely blinded, Gabriel. You loved her too much to see the monster." It was the harshest truth anyone had ever spoken to him. It was a flawless, surgical strike to his ego and his heart. Beatrice was right. If she had come to him with accusations against Victoria, his beautiful, perfect, grieving wife, he probably would have killed the maid himself for the disrespect. Victoria had manipulated his grief, his love, and his trust with the precision of a master chess player. "Sullivan is on shift tonight," Gabriel stated, a dangerous edge creeping into his whisper. "He's in the gatehouse," Beatrice confirmed. "There are 4 men patrolling the perimeter, all Sullivan's guys, all loyal to Victoria and whatever promises the district attorney has made them." Gabriel closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, locking away the husband who had just been betrayed and resurrecting the street-hardened, ruthless boss who had conquered the eastern seaboard. He needed to disappear before the sun came up. "We are leaving," Gabriel ordered. "Right now." "We can't," Beatrice said, her voice laced with panic. "The garage doors will trigger an alert on Sullivan's tablet. The perimeter sensors are active." "They don't know about the cellar," Gabriel replied, holstering his Glock. When Gabriel's father had purchased the Oyster Bay estate in the late 1980s, he had discovered a Prohibition-era smuggler's tunnel that ran from the sub-basement wine cellar straight out to a concealed sea cave on the rocky shoreline of the Long Island Sound. Gabriel had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars quietly reinforcing it, keeping it off all official blueprints and structural surveys. Not even Victoria knew it existed. To her, the cellar was just where Gabriel kept his vintage Barolo. Gabriel grabbed Beatrice by the elbow, guiding her out of the pantry. They moved swiftly through the subterranean levels of the mansion, bypassing the main garage and heading deeper underground. Inside the climate-controlled wine cellar, Gabriel moved towards the back wall, scanning the rows of dusty bottles. He reached for a specific magnum of 1982 Bordeaux, gripping the neck and twisting it 90 degrees clockwise. A heavy hydraulic hiss echoed in the damp air as the entire floor-to-ceiling wine rack swung outward, revealing a dark, stone-lined passageway. Before stepping inside, Gabriel knelt by a loose paving stone near the threshold, prying it up with his pocketknife. Beneath it was a waterproof Pelican case. He popped the latches. Inside lay 2 untraceable satellite phones, a stack of blank passports, a dozen heavy gold Krugerrands, and $50,000 in banded $100 bills. It was his ultimate fail-safe, a go-bag he prayed he would never have to use. "Take this," Gabriel said, handing Beatrice a heavy, suppressed Heckler and Koch USP tactical pistol from the case. "Do you remember how to use it?" Beatrice took the weapon, her hands remarkably steady now that they were moving. "Your father taught me when the Colombians tried to take the docks in '94. Point and squeeze." "Exactly," Gabriel said grimly. He slung the Pelican case over his shoulder, grabbed a high-powered tactical flashlight, and stepped into the darkness of the tunnel. "Stay close. Once we hit the water, the real war begins." The wind howling off the Long Island Sound was brutal, cutting through Gabriel's tailored wool coat like a field surgeon's scalpel. Freezing rain pelted their faces as they emerged from the hidden sea cave. Below them, violently crashing against the jagged rocks, was the black, churning water. Hidden beneath a camouflage tarp tucked into a natural alcove was a matte black, Zodiac rigid inflatable boat, RIB, equipped with twin silent-run outboard motors. It was a military-grade vessel designed for stealth insertions. Gabriel and Beatrice climbed aboard, the older woman shivering violently, despite the heavy rain slicker Gabriel had draped over her. Gabriel fired up the engines. They roared to life with a low, muffled purr, barely audible over the crashing waves. He cut through the treacherous surf, steering the Zodiac away from the Oyster Bay estate, leaving behind the multi-million-dollar fortress that was now a tomb for his old life. It took them 2 hours of grueling, freezing navigation to reach a derelict, privately owned pier in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. By the time Gabriel tied off the boat, the sun was beginning to threaten the horizon, turning the bruised sky a pale, sickly grey. Gabriel led Beatrice to a rusted, unassuming warehouse a few blocks from the water. It looked entirely abandoned, the windows boarded up and tagged with graffiti. But when Gabriel punched a 12-digit alphanumeric code into a hidden keypad behind a loose brick, heavy steel doors rolled back. Inside was a fully stocked, off-the-grid safe house. Racks of servers hummed in the corner. An armory of heavy weaponry lined the far wall, and a surgical bay sat sterile and ready under fluorescent lights. "Get out of those wet clothes and make some coffee," Gabriel ordered, his voice operating on pure, adrenaline-fueled autopilot. He threw his soaking wet overcoat onto a leather sofa and walked straight to the server racks. He had to move faster than Victoria. District Attorney Sterling had the encrypted flash drive, but Gabriel knew something Sterling didn't. The drive didn't contain the actual ledger or the offshore account numbers. It contained a fragmented, cryptographic key. To access the billions of dollars Gabriel had hidden in Zurich, the Cayman Islands, and Singapore, one needed the flash drive and a biometric retinal scan, authenticated through a heavily guarded dark web portal. But Victoria was smart. If she had the drive, she was likely already planning to use Sterling's federal resources to brute force the encryption or find a way to bypass the biometric lock. Gabriel pulled out one of the satellite phones from the Pelican case. He didn't call Dominic. He didn't call any of his captains or lieutenants. His entire command structure was corrupted. He needed a ghost. He needed someone who existed outside the Romano family's orbit, someone whose loyalty was forged in blood, not money. He dialed a number memorized deep in his subconscious. It rang twice. "Yeah," a deep, gravelly voice answered. The sound of heavy machinery echoed in the background. "Cole," Gabriel said. Silence hung on the line for a long, heavy moment. Cole Mercer was a former Marine Force recon sniper. He and Gabriel had grown up together in the unforgiving streets of Hell's Kitchen. When Gabriel took over the family, he had intentionally forced Cole out of the syndicate, violently exiling him to keep him off the FBI's radar. It was a calculated cruelty, meant to protect his only real friend. Cole now ran an under-the-table chop shop in Newark, operating entirely off the grid. "You're supposed to be in Chicago, Gabe," Cole finally said, his tone wary. "Chicago was a setup. The feds hit the warehouse," Gabriel replied, typing rapidly on a secure terminal, initializing the protocol to freeze his own offshore assets. "The leak is inside my house, Cole. It's Victoria. She's working with DA Sterling. They orchestrated the hit on Leo." The sound of machinery in the background abruptly stopped. The silence that followed was lethal. Cole had loved Leo like an older brother. "Where are you?" Cole asked. The wariness was gone, replaced by a terrifying, focused calm. "Brooklyn Safe House, the Navy Yard," Gabriel said. "I need you, Cole. I don't have a crew anymore. I don't know who is on my payroll and who is on hers. I have to tear my own empire down to the studs to kill the rot." "Give me 40 minutes, Cole said. "I'm bringing the heavy tools." The line went dead. Gabriel set the phone down. He looked over at Beatrice, who was standing by a small kitchenette, shivering as she poured hot water into 2 mugs. "Are we going to survive this, Gabriel?" she asked quietly, handing him a mug of black coffee. Gabriel took the mug, feeling the heat seep into his frozen hands. He thought of his beautiful wife, sitting in his study, wearing his robe, laughing with the man trying to put him in a cage. He thought of his brother's blood caked onto the gold signet ring. "Victoria thinks she's playing a game of chess," Gabriel said, staring at the glowing monitors of the server rack. "She thinks she trapped the king, but she forgot one very important detail." "What's that?" Beatrice asked. Gabriel turned to face her, his eyes cold, empty, and burning with a terrifying promise of violence. "I didn't inherit this empire by being a king, Beatrice. I built it by being a butcher, and they just invited me back to the slaughterhouse." Cole Mercer arrived at the Brooklyn Navy Yard safe house exactly 38 minutes after the call ended. He did not drive a conspicuous sports car or a blacked-out SUV. He arrived in a battered, rust-eaten Ford Econoline plumbing van that bypassed every license plate scanner on the FDR drive without triggering a single algorithm. When the heavy steel doors rolled up, Cole stepped into the fluorescent light, carrying 2 olive-drab canvas duffel bags that clinked with the heavy, unmistakable sound of ordnance. Cole was a mountain of a man, his arms covered in faded military ink, his jawline covered in a thick, dark beard. He dropped the bags on the concrete floor and looked at Gabriel, then at the older woman, sitting quietly with a tactical pistol resting in her lap. "The feds are swarming the city," Cole said, his voice a low rumble. He pulled a burner phone from his heavy canvas jacket and tossed it onto the server desk. "News broke 10 minutes ago. The district attorney is holding a press conference at Foley Square at noon. He's announcing a massive, multi-agency crackdown on the Eastern Seaboard syndicates. He's framing the Chicago raid as a victory, claiming they narrowly missed you, but seized critical assets." Gabriel did not look up from the glowing monitors. His fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard with blistering speed. "Richard is playing to the cameras," Gabriel muttered, his eyes tracking lines of encrypted code. "He needs the public narrative set before he legally seizes my assets. But he can't seize what doesn't exist." "What are you doing?" Cole asked, stepping behind Gabriel to look at the screens. "I am burning the ships," Gabriel replied coldly. For the next 2 hours, the safe house was filled only with the frantic clacking of keys and the hum of the servers. Gabriel Romano was not just a street enforcer. He possessed a brilliant, terrifyingly analytical mind. He logged into a heavily encrypted dark web portal, routing his connection through a dozen proxy servers in Estonia, Iceland, and Brazil. He accessed the core financial node of his entire empire, a ghost server housed in a decommissioned bunker in the Swiss Alps. With a series of complex keystrokes and a retinal scan authenticated through a specialized peripheral Cole had brought in the duffel bag, Gabriel initiated the Samson Protocol. It was a financial self-destruct sequence. Gabriel systematically drained the syndicate's operational liquidity. He liquidated the front companies in Manhattan, hollowed out the shell corporations registered in Delaware, and emptied the massive offshore accounts in Zurich and the Cayman Islands. He didn't just steal the money back from his traitorous lieutenants and his wife. He fractured it into 10,000 untraceable cryptocurrency microtransactions, scattering billions of dollars into the digital wind, bouncing them across decentralized ledgers until they vanished entirely. Finally, he transferred the remaining core assets, a completely clean, untraceable sum of $200 million, into a blind trust accessible only by a physical cryptographic key that hung on a titanium chain around his neck. He hit the final key. The screens went black. The Romano crime family was officially bankrupt. "It's done," Gabriel said, standing up and slipping his Brioni suit jacket off, tossing it aside. "The lieutenants who betrayed me have empty pockets. The payroll for the corrupt cops and the perimeter guards at the estate just bounced. And the flash drive Victoria handed to the district attorney is now a useless piece of plastic, pointing to deleted servers." Cole unzipped the duffel bags. Inside was a terrifying arsenal. Matte black Sig Sauer MCX rifles, customized Glock 17 airs, Kevlar plates, and flashbang grenades. "So we have no money, no army, and the entire federal government is looking for us," Cole stated, a grim smile playing on his lips. "Just like the old days in Hell's Kitchen." "We don't need an army," Gabriel said, strapping a Kevlar vest over his tailored dress shirt. "We just need to cut the head off the snake. But first, we need to know exactly who swung the sword." Gabriel turned to Beatrice. The older woman had watched the entire process in stoic silence. "Beatrice," Gabriel said softly, "I need to know about Vincent. Did he know about the hit on Leo?" Vincent was Gabriel's most trusted captain, the man who controlled the lucrative illegal gambling rings out of a high-end, velvet-roped club in meatpacking district called the Obsidian. Beatrice stood up, her dark eyes flashing with a sudden, unexpected intensity. The terrified maid from the kitchen was gone. In her place stood a woman whose posture had straightened, revealing a hardened, terrifying resilience. Vincent was the one who paid the Russian contractors, Beatrice said, her voice devoid of any warmth. I saw him hand the briefcase to Victoria in the solarium 3 days after the funeral. He is just as guilty as she is. Gabriel nodded. He chambered around into his sidearm. Then Vincent is our first stop. It was 4:15 a.m. when the plumbing van pulled up to the service alley behind the Obsidian. The club was officially closed, but Gabriel knew that Vincent used the soundproofed VIP basement as his personal counting room. Gabriel and Cole moved with the lethal, synchronized precision of apex predators. They bypassed the reinforced steel service door by cutting the magnetic lock wiring with a specialized laser cutter Cole had brought. They stepped into the dimly lit, neon-soaked corridor, smelling of expensive cigar smoke and spilled expensive champagne. 2 heavily armed guards in tailored suits stood outside the counting room. They didn't even have time to reach for their weapons. Cole dropped the first one with a brutal, silent strike to the carotid artery, using the stock of his rifle. Gabriel stepped past him, grabbing the second guard by the lapels and driving his knee upward with bone-shattering force, rendering the man unconscious before he hit the floor. Gabriel kicked the heavy double doors open. Inside the opulent room, surrounded by stacks of $100 bills and ledgers, sat Vincent. He was laughing, a glass of Macallan 25 in his hand, talking on his cell phone, when the doors crashed open and Gabriel Romano walked in, a suppressed pistol leveled directly at his chest. Vincent's laugh died in his throat. The expensive scotch slipped from his fingers, shattering on the Italian marble floor. "Gabriel," Vincent choked out, the color draining from his face. You're supposed to be in Chicago." "Plans changed," Gabriel said, his voice a dead, emotionless void. He stepped forward, his eyes locked on the traitor who had helped murder his brother. "Hang up the phone, Vincent." Vincent slowly lowered the phone, his hands trembling violently. "Boss, whatever you heard, it's a lie. The feds—" Gabriel didn't ask questions. He didn't want a confession. He raised his weapon and shot Vincent once in the kneecap. The silenced gunshot was a sharp thwip, followed instantly by Vincent's agonizing, blood-curdling scream. The captain collapsed to the floor, clutching his shattered leg, writhing in the scattered $100 bills. "This is how it works, Vincent," Gabriel said, standing over the bleeding man, his expression completely unreadable. "You are going to tell me exactly how many men are currently guarding my estate. You are going to tell me exactly what time the district attorney is arriving there tonight. And if you lie to me, the next bullet goes into your other knee." Through gasps of agony, Vincent confessed everything. Victoria was hosting a private, heavily guarded dinner at the Oyster Bay estate at 8 p.m. that evening to finalize the handover of the syndicate's assets to Richard. There were 20 heavily armed mercenaries, not Romano loyalists, but private military contractors hired by Victoria, patrolling the grounds. Gabriel listened, his face a mask of cold fury. When Vincent finished, sobbing and begging for his life, Gabriel looked at Cole. "Tie him off," Gabriel ordered. "Leave him for the feds. They'll find him when they raid the club tomorrow. Not a Seaton." Gabriel turned his back on the man who had betrayed his family and walked out into the cold New York morning. The purge had begun, and by midnight the golden cage would be painted in blood. The Oyster Bay estate looked magnificent in the evening light. The storm had passed, leaving a crisp, freezing night sky blanketed with stars. Inside the grand dining room, the crystal chandeliers cast a warm, triumphant glow over the long mahogany table. Victoria sat at the head of the table, radiating absolute power. She wore a stunning, backless crimson gown, and around her neck rested a heavy, breathtaking diamond necklace that had once belonged to Gabriel's mother. She raised a crystal flute of vintage Dom Perignon, her green eyes sparkling with a predatory victory. Sitting to her right was the district attorney, Richard. He looked uneasy, his eyes constantly darting towards the heavy, curtained windows. But he raised his glass to meet hers. "To a new era," Victoria purred, the sound melodic and deadly. "The king is dead. Long live the queen." "We don't know he's dead," Richard reminded her nervously, taking a large gulp of the champagne. "My federal contacts say he vanished. His jet is in Jersey, but he completely dropped off the grid. And my financial team just called in a panic. The offshore accounts, they're empty, Victoria. The routing numbers on the flash drive lead to dead ends. Gabriel liquidated everything this morning." Victoria's confident smile faltered for a fraction of a second, her perfectly manicured fingers tightening around the crystal flute. "Impossible. He doesn't have the codes. He needs the physical drive." "He built the system, Victoria," Richard hissed, panic finally bleeding into his voice. "He's out there, and if he knows what you did—" Before the district attorney could finish his sentence, the grand dining room was plunged into absolute pitch-black darkness. The heavy, rhythmic hum of the estate's massive generators sputtered and died. The silence that followed was suffocating. "Sullivan!" Victoria shouted into the darkness, her voice losing its melodic grace, replaced by a sharp, panicked shrill. "Sullivan, get in here! What happened to the power?" There was no answer. The heavy mahogany doors of the dining room did not open. Outside, in the freezing darkness of the estate grounds, the private military contractors Victoria had hired were experiencing a systematic, terrifying dismantling. They were highly trained mercenaries, but they were fighting ghosts. Cole Mercer, utilizing his Force Recon sniper training, moved through the ancient oak trees with thermal optics, neutralizing the perimeter guards with suppressed subsonic rounds before they even knew they were being hunted. But the true infiltration was happening from below. Gabriel did not breach the front gates. He emerged from the wine cellar tunnel, rising from the subterranean depths of his own home like a vengeful spirit. And he was not alone. Walking beside him, moving with a silent, terrifying grace that betrayed her age, was Beatrice. She had traded her grey maid's uniform for dark, tactical clothing. In her hands, she held the Heckler & Koch tactical pistol with the practiced, lethal ease of a seasoned killer. The greatest trick Gabriel's father had ever pulled was convincing the world that his most ruthless, efficient enforcer had retired. She hadn't retired. She had simply put on an apron and faded into the background, watching over the Romano heirs. Beatrice was the hidden blade of the family, and tonight she was unleashed. Gabriel and Beatrice moved through the dark hallways of the West Wing. They found the remaining interior guards clustered near the main electrical panel in the foyer, confused by the sudden blackout. Gabriel didn't hesitate. He stepped out of the shadows, his weapon raised, the laser sight cutting through the darkness. 2 suppressed shots echoed through the foyer, dropping the guards instantly. Beatrice covered his flank, her eyes cold and calculating, securing the corridor. "Secure the perimeter doors," Gabriel whispered to Beatrice. "No one leaves." Gabriel walked towards the dining room. He didn't rush. He savored the heavy, terrifying silence of the house he had built. He reached the mahogany double doors and pushed them open. The only light in the dining room came from the pale moonlight filtering through the tall windows. Victoria and Richard were standing near the fireplace, their silhouettes trembling in the cold light. Richard had drawn a small, snub-nosed revolver, his hands shaking violently. "Drop it, Richard!" Gabriel's voice boomed from the doorway. It was a voice forged in violence, commanding and absolute. Richard gasped, dropping the revolver as if it were red-hot iron. He backed away, his hands raised in surrender. Gabriel stepped into the moonlight. His tailored suit was gone, replaced by tactical gear. His face was a mask of cold, unrelenting vengeance. He looked at Victoria. For the first time since he had met her, the pristine, untouchable swan looked utterly terrified. Her crimson gown suddenly looked like a blood stain in the pale light. "Gabriel," Victoria breathed, taking a tentative step forward, her voice trembling as she attempted to summon the loving wife persona. "Gabriel, thank God. He forced me. Richard threatened me. He said if I didn't help him, he would—" "Stop," Gabriel commanded, the single word echoing like a gunshot. He walked slowly towards the head of the table. He didn't point his weapon at her. He didn't need to. He possessed a power over her, now that was far worse than death. "I heard everything in the study, Victoria," Gabriel said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, intimate whisper. "I heard you laugh about Leo's ring. I heard you brag about the hit." Victoria stopped moving. The facade shattered completely, her beautiful face twisted into an ugly, venomous sneer. "You were always too soft for this world, Gabrielle. You built the empire, but you didn't have the stomach to rule it. I made you a king." "You made me a widower," Gabriel corrected coldly. He reached into his tactical vest and pulled out a thick, manila envelope. He tossed it onto the mahogany table. It slid across the polished wood and stopped perfectly in front of the trembling district attorney. "What is that?" Richard stammered, staring at the envelope. "That is your entire life, Richard," Gabriel said, turning his cold gaze to the politician. "Bank statements from your offshore accounts, audio recordings of you accepting bribes from my lieutenants, and a highly detailed, irrefutable paper trail proving you conspired with my wife to murder my brother, Leo Romano." Richard's knees buckled. He collapsed into a dining chair, burying his face in his hands. "You're a dead man, Gabriel," Victoria spat, her eyes wild with rage. "You have no money. You have no men. You're nothing." Gabriel stepped closer to her, his towering presence suffocating her. He reached out, his gloved fingers brushing against the cold, heavy diamonds of his mother's necklace resting on her collarbone. "I have $200 million in a blind trust," Gabriel whispered, leaning in so only she could hear. "I have my freedom. And you? You have absolutely nothing." He unclasped the diamond necklace with a swift, brutal motion, pulling it from her neck. Victoria gasped, her hands flying to her bare chest. "The FBI is currently breaching the front gates," Gabriel stated, looking at his tactical watch. "I sent them an anonymous package an hour ago. The same evidence that's on that table. They aren't coming to arrest me, Richard. I'm a ghost. They are coming to arrest the corrupt district attorney and the socialite who ordered a mob hit." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing rapidly louder, shattering the quiet night of Oyster Bay. Red and blue lights began to strobe against the frosted windows. Gabriel looked at Victoria one last time. He saw the realization wash over her, the absolute, crushing weight of her defeat. She wasn't going to die a martyr in a hail of bullets. She was going to be stripped of her wealth, her status, and her freedom. She was going to spend the rest of her life in a federal penitentiary, a ruined queen locked in a real cage of concrete and steel. Gabriel turned his back on her. He walked out of the dining room, disappearing into the shadows of the hallway. Beatrice was waiting by the hidden entrance to the cellar, her weapon lowered. "Is it done?" she asked quietly. "It's done," Gabriel replied, walking past her and descending into the darkness. "Let's go home." Gabriel Romano walked away from the ashes of his empire, proving that the most dangerous man in the room is never the one shouting the loudest, but the one who can dismantle your entire life in absolute silence. He traded his golden cage for the shadows, leaving behind a legacy of absolute retribution. If this story of brutal betrayal, hidden identities, and relentless mafia vengeance kept you on the edge of your seat, drop a comment below letting us know your favorite twist. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more dark, dramatic, real-life stories, and share this video with anyone who loves a high-stakes tale of revenge. What would you have done in Gabriel's shoes? Let's debate in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next thrilling narrative.